So you have a Kubernetes cluster and you want to restrict certain amount of actions that are performed on the Kubernetes cluster. Maybe you do not want a node port service to be created inside the cluster. Maybe you do not want a specific type of repository from which the images are pulled. And maybe there are some other policies that you need to enforce. So these are the policies. This is the Kubernetes admission controller. So basically the request comes in, you do a kubectl run nginx --- image nginx. You are an authenticated user, you are authorized to perform that action. But while the admission phase, there are certain policies that restrict it from being admitted to the Kubernetes cluster. For example, there is a native admission controller called resource quota. So for example, if you have the resource quota applied for a particular namespace and you are going beyond the resource quota, then the request will fail. Similar to that, when you need dynamic policies, when you need more set of policies, then the API request comes in and you have the authentication authorization. After that, there are few things, which is the admission. In that, there is mutating admission and validating admission. Validating admission means you are validating against a certain set of rules and policies. Mutating means you are again validating against certain set of policies, but you are changing the resources. You are updating the resources or editing the resources that are applied on the Kubernetes cluster before they get applied and get stored in etcd. So in this, there is a very interesting project called Kyverno, which is a CNCF project. And Kyverno is a cloud native policy engine. It is meant for Kubernetes, built for Kubernetes, and allows to create a lot of policies. It is YAML based. You can enforce policies as admission controller. There's policy reporting. You can do the comprehensive unit testing of the end-to-end policies and a lot more. And the agenda for this particular video is how you can use the shared resources within the multi-tenancy environment. So what we are trying to say here is the shared platform stack is one of the critical components of multi-tenancy. Now, what I want is I want a Kubernetes cluster and I want virtual Kubernetes clusters using vClusters. By now, you probably know why you are creating virtual Kubernetes cluster, because you have been following vCluster YouTube channel. If not, then like and subscribe. So basically, you have the host cluster and you have the virtual cluster. Now, when you have the host Kubernetes cluster, what I want is Kyverno to be installed onto the host cluster, and the policies which I create cluster-wide should be respected by the virtual clusters as well. And yes, it happens. So let's see this in action to understand it in a much better way. So I have a plain Kubernetes playground on Killer Coda so that you can also try it. So what I'll try to do is help repo add a charts.loft.sh, hand repo update, and then kubectl create namespace vCluster. So kubectl get nodes. This is a 2-node cluster. Kubectl get pods -a, and you have the pods which are running. Now we create the virtual cluster. So we don't have any values.yaml file. So we'll just create the virtual cluster. The virtual cluster is getting created now. And since it is a fresh playground, so it doesn't have the virtual cluster or the vCluster CLI. So we'll download the vCluster CLI as well. Let's run this. So it is downloading the vCluster CLI. The next thing that we need to do is we need to connect to the virtual cluster. So we'll copy this command. Get pods -n vCluster. And our pod is running. So it will be ready anytime. And then we should be able to connect to this particular virtual cluster, which will actually create a proxy and then generate a kubeconfig file and merge it with the existing kubeconfig file. And the pods have come up. So we'll run the vCluster connect my vCluster -n vCluster command, and we'll wait for the kubeconfig stuff to happen. The next step is also to install Kyverno on the host cluster. So I hope we are still inside the host cluster. kubectl get nodes. Oh, we already went inside the virtual cluster. So we need to switch back to the host cluster. So kubectl config get contexts, and we'll use the host cluster context. So you can see there is the virtual cluster context created as well. Kubectl config use context. So we are in the host cluster context. We'll install Kyverno now on the host Kubernetes cluster. It is installing the services, deployment, custom resources, all that stuff. And now we'll apply this particular cluster policy. So there are two types of policies, cluster policies and namespace policies. For now, we are trying to apply the cluster policies so that everything and anything created inside the Kubernetes cluster follows this particular policy. Here, what we are trying to say is we do not want anything of a service type node port. So whatever is the type of node port, we do not want that to be created inside the Kubernetes cluster. So the service is created, the cluster policy is created. So we'll run a command kubectl create service node port demo -tcp80 and failed to create the node port service because the request is denied. This is fine because right now we are in the context of host cluster and we applied the policy to the host cluster. Now let's see if this is applied to the virtual cluster as well. So kubectl config use context kubectl get pods -a. We are inside the virtual cluster now. We'll run the same service command kubectl service node port, and it is not allowed inside the virtual cluster as well. Now, this is the powerful feature because right now I can create policies and enforce them on the host Kubernetes clusters and reuse them on the every virtual cluster that is created. So creating a compliance of your multi-tenancy environment is made easy using a tool called Kyverno in addition to what you are already using for creating the virtual clusters, which is vCluster. So that's it for this particular video. I hope you enjoyed learning about Kyverno and how you can use that in the context of multi-tenancy where you are creating virtual clusters using vCluster. If you have any doubts, please feel free to check out our Slack and join and ask queries. Do not miss any other video from vCluster YouTube channel so that you can learn more about CNCF tooling and how you can apply their concepts in the multi-tenancy ecosystem. That's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching and make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Yes, we'll be there at KubeCon, so make sure to drop by the vCluster booth and sign up for the multi-tenancy March Super Stream series that is going on. Thanks so much and see you in the next video.